Yogah Karmasu Kaushalam.
In this video, we are going to talk about the issues in developing writing skills while teaching English as a second language. In the English language classroom, writing activities serve two different purposes. On one hand, they help students to learn the kinds of personal, academic, or professional writing which they will use in their daily lives. On the other hand, writing in English has a more purely pedagogical role. It reinforces the learning which goes on through the medium of listening, speaking, and reading skills. In the language classroom, whether for beginners or for more advanced students, teachers give writing assignments as a way of following up on listening and speaking exercises or reading activities. In addition, students in the advanced stages may need to learn how to write well-organized, carefully reasoned essays. The writing of one or more essays is often a requirement on national examinations. Widely used standardized English proficiency examinations like Test of English as a Foreign Language also requires such advanced writing tasks. Many students find that as they become more skilled at writing in one language, their writing in any other language they know may also improve. Perhaps surprisingly, this increased skill may even transfer from a second language to the first one. It is difficult to give a lesson plan which will cover all types of writing assignments. So when students are composing, as opposed to doing writing tasks, to reinforce oral or reading activities, the teacher should always have a pre-writing phase and should always allow plenty of time for revision. In fact, it is so difficult to separate writing and revising that the most appropriate lesson format consists of just two main phases: pre-writing and writing and revising. Pre-writing consists of brainstorming in various forms, oral and written, the analysis of the models, reading, and note-taking. Writing and revision consists of the time for multiple drafts as well as feedback that we receive from teachers and other students. Now, there are two things which require attention. The first is the emphasis on getting the students to communicate through writing. Even the earliest writing assignments should be tied to narratives about personally meaningful topics. When this type of assignment is contrasted with another type in which the student writes out a list of unrelated sentences, either as practice to reinforce a particular grammatical topic or as an exercise in the application of certain translation rules, the choice becomes clear. If the teacher is using textbooks which present writing as drills rather than as communication, then the teacher needs to devise supplementary writing activities which allow the students to communicate on topics which have meaning for them. The second is that composing is viewed as an iterative process. Writers gather their thoughts, search out additional information, rehearse vocabulary and phraseology, put something into rough written forms, review what they have written, evaluate it for adequacy of content and coherence of organization, ask for critical feedback from another reader, add or delete content, reorganize to make the narrative or argument easier to follow, review and revise again, and finally edit to check for accuracy in grammar, vocabulary, spelling and punctuation. Now, there is a lot of focus on meaning. The writer usually does not get it right the first time around. Unfortunately, because of the way composing is often taught, students get the impression that once they start putting words on paper, the result should be very much close to a finished product. Now, they fail to appreciate the importance of the pre-writing activities, and they are likely to think of revision solely in terms of proofreading for grammatical or mechanical errors. If writing is taught as a process, it is almost guaranteed that the teacher will encourage the students to communicate through their writing. But the teachers must remember two key points. First, giving students enough time in pre-writing activities to gather their thoughts, discover the language needed to express them, and establish the focus of the composition. Second, showing by the teacher's response to their writing that the first concern is the message they are trying to convey. Teachers will defeat the purpose if there is an immediate pointing out of the grammatical and mechanical errors that are there. Many teachers find it unsettling to return a composition to a student in which there are errors which have not been picked out with red ink or otherwise putting up a comment. Perhaps it will help to view the students' composing efforts in the following way. In the early stages of learning the writing skill, the goal is to gradually increase the length of the compositions. A teacher should not expect polished productions. Instead, the emphasis should be on the pre-writing activities and on helping the students to get their ideas down on paper. As the students' writing proficiency increases, the teachers can gradually lead them to techniques for revision and can set up writing assignments so that they have time to produce one or more non-final draft. Even then, while responding to an early draft, the teacher should think primarily of how clearly and effectively the message has been presented. In recent years, many language teachers have tried an interesting technique for encouraging students to write more and to communicate more through their writing. This technique, called dialogue journals, is a form of interactive writing between the teacher and the student. The beauty of this technique is that teachers can use it with students of any degree of language proficiency, even with beginners. This is the way it works. So each student has a composition book which he or she uses as a diary or a journal. Now, on a regular basis, preferably every day, students write in their journals as much or as little as they want to write on whatever subject interests them at the moment. They can return to the same topic in a later entry if they like, or they can treat a new topic each time. They can ask the teacher questions about features of language or culture, or about personal matters if they need to. They can express opinions and make requests. The dialogue aspect of dialogue journals results from the way the teacher responds to the student entries. As frequently as possible, depending on the size of the class, the teacher asks to read the students' journals and writes an answering entry in each one. In effect, the teacher and the students carry on a conversation through the journal. Teachers who have used dialogue journals with their students for a considerable period of time have found that they bring many noteworthy results, both personal and pedagogical. Because the written dialogues are informal and private, most teachers feel that they achieve a greater mutual understanding with their students. On the pedagogical side, the students gradually increase their writing competence, moving toward greater independence as writers. Thanks to the feedback provided by the teacher, they gain a greater understanding of the features of written English. Their entries become longer and more complex. At the same time, because they are exploring their own ideas and interests, they are building up a store of topical materials which they can mine later for writing assignments of a more formal type. As students advance to more complex forms of writing, the links between reading and writing become increasingly important. The texts that a teacher uses for instruction in reading provide students with food for thought and topics for oral and written discussion. At the same time, the formal features of different types of written discourse serve as models which students can bring in their own writing. As teachers take up different features of discourse in reading assignments, they can introduce parallel writing activities which employ the same features. Now, to complete the circle, when students have tried to incorporate new formal features into their writing, they become more aware of those features when they crop up in subsequent reading assignments. Thus, reading and writing play mutually enhancing roles. Now, to talk a bit about the pre-writing phase, the purpose is to get the kettle boiling. When students begin a writing project, they need ideas, a purpose, or a plan which will provide a focus for the ideas, the language with which to express the ideas, and enough interest and enthusiasm to sustain the effort of getting the ideas down on paper. Depending upon the age of the students and the level of their language proficiency, a variety of techniques may be used for launching the project. One of the most flexible of these techniques is brainstorming. It can be done with either novice or experienced writers, young or old, individually or in small groups or as a whole class. Now, the point of a brainstorming session is to freely associate, to produce as many ideas on a given topic as possible, as quickly as possible, without worrying about the quality of the ideas or about grammar, spelling, or punctuation. Now, a variation of brainstorming is a technique called loop writing or looping, which is more appropriately done on an individual basis with students at an intermediate or advanced level of proficiency. Each student writes without stopping for 5 to 10 minutes, putting down anything that comes to mind on a given topic. As in all forms of brainstorming, there is no editing, no worry about the aptness of the ideas, the brilliance of the prose, the accuracy of the grammar, spelling, and punctuation. The student then stops, reads what has just been written, reflects on it, and then sums it up in a single sentence. This sentence becomes the kernel idea for the next loop. So, after going through this procedure 2 more times, the student should have arrived at a summary sentence, which he or she can use as the focus for an essay. I hope the points discussed will prove to be helpful in enriching the language learning experience in your own classroom. I wish all of you to have a great time teaching. Thank you.
I thank you for your very scholarly deliberation on teaching of English as second language in India. Exactly, when we talk of English here, Devmalyo, and particularly in Indian context, this variety which you have talked about,
Yes.
generally people don't look at from this angle. So,
Right.
this is one of the angle which will be very useful to many of the friends who are really looking from this angle also.
Of course, sir.
When you look at the class and different kind of students are sitting there,
Right.
from different areas of India, from different geographical places of India,
Right.
and maybe are places which are linguistically different
Yes.
from different areas.
Yes.
So when they come together, even teacher has to think of that diversity, and we should respect the diversity in different terms.
Of
And
course,
we
sir.
should try to make them unite, and we should try to make the class very effective.
Right, sir.
Now with this note, I have a question for you. What do you feel about the teacher's role in tailoring courses to meet students' need and need of the outside world as well?
Thank you, sir, for your question. Well, English for specific purposes is a movement based on the proposition that all language teaching should be tailored to the specific learning and language needs
Yes,
of
very true.
identified group of students, and also sensitized to the socio-cultural contexts in which these students will be using English. Now, most of the movement's practitioners are teachers of adults,
True.
those students whose needs are more readily identified within the academic, occupational or professional settings. So, English for specific purposes continues to be very common in English as a second language context,
Very true.
where an increasing number of adult students are eager to learn business English or academic English in order to pursue their careers or study in English medium educational institutions.
True.
Now, one remarkable example of the explosion of English for specific purposes programs in second language learning contexts is the Indian scenario. Now, English for specific purposes is further divisible into English for academic purposes and English for occupational purposes. Within English for academic purposes, we further have English for science and technology, English for business and economics, English for medical purposes, and English for the law. Within English for occupational purposes, we have English for professional purposes and vocational ESL. Now, this sort of specialization, this sort of branching tells us the amount of diversity that exists within the different approaches to teach English to the students. So, obviously, there is a very critical need to specify and to generate approaches whereby students are categorized according to their needs and not straitjacketed into one classroom.
Very true.
Which would be doing a lot of injustice to their
Yes.
capabilities as well as their aims.
Yes. So I think this will be very useful to our fellow participants, and it will help them to make their teaching and learning very interesting. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.